Sarah and I had been inseparable since kindergarten. Back then, we used to play in her backyard for hours, building forts out of blankets and pretending to be explorers on the run from imaginary monsters. We shared everything: dreams, secrets, even our favorite books. But somewhere along the way, our paths began to diverge. In middle school, I started focusing on academics. I wanted to make my parents proud, to be the perfect daughter who excelled in school and fit in with the popular crowd. Sarah, on the other hand, began to pull away from everything we once shared. She started dressing in darker clothes, listening to heavy metal, and hanging out with a group of kids who seemed to enjoy pushing every possible boundary. By the time we got to high school, the gap between us was a chasm. I became the head cheerleader, dating Jake, the quarterback everyone adored. Sarah was the girl who sat alone in the cafeteria, scribbling in her notebook and wearing black lipstick. She claimed she was just being herself, but I couldn't help feeling like she was deliberately trying to be the opposite of everything I was. Our friendship officially ended the day she snapped at me in front of everyone in gym class. I had been talking about prom with my friends, excited about the dress my mom had helped me pick out. Sarah, who had been silently tying her boots in the corner, suddenly stood up and said loud enough for the entire room to hear, "You're such a cliché, Lila. Do you ever think for yourself, or do you just follow whatever everyone else does?" The room fell silent, and I could feel the eyes of my classmates on me. Embarrassed and furious, I shouted back, "At least I don't dress like I'm auditioning for a vampire movie." Sarah stormed out, slamming the gym doors behind her, and that was the last real conversation we had. From that point on, we were strangers living in the same house. I'm worried that my childhood best friend, Sarah, has become obsessed with witchcraft. We've always been complete opposites. Honestly, sometimes I wondered how we could even be this close. I was the straight-A student, and she skipped classes all the time. When I became the head cheerleader, she entered her gothic phase. God, it was such a disaster. Those hideous chains hanging from her pants, the black lipstick. I couldn't believe her parents let her dress like that. At church, I always wore my best dress, but she looked like she was heading to a Slipknot concert. When I started dating Jake, the quarterback of the football team, she called me a cliché. There was something unsettling in her tone, but I convinced myself she was just jealous. Prom was approaching, and Jake and I were the perfect candidates for prom king and queen. Sarah, meanwhile, planned to go alone. Her look was like a funeral procession: black dress, dark makeup, skull-shaped jewelry. That's when her witchcraft obsession began. It felt like just another desperate attempt to draw attention to herself. One day, she asked me to come to her room. There was a Ouija board on the floor. As a Christian, I was completely against participating in that sort of thing, but she forced me to place my hands on hers. "Ask something," she whispered. Reluctantly, I did, and her hands slid to yes. She acted shocked, but I couldn't take it anymore and ran out of the room. After that, she constantly read occult books, crafted weird trinkets, and placed them all over the house. Her behavior was becoming more and more disturbing. I started fearing she might try to curse me. The final straw came tonight. I walked into the kitchen and found her lighting candles. Crystals were spread out on the table, and strange symbols were drawn on the floor with chalk. Her eyes glimmered with an eerie light as she whispered something, holding an old, worn book in her hands. "What are you doing?" I shouted. "Are you trying to summon demons?" She ignored me, speaking louder in a language I didn't recognize. "In nomine di nostri Adonai, et in nomine angelorum." Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through the back of my head, as if I'd been struck. It felt like my skull was about to explode. "Stop it!" I screamed, trembling from the agony. The candles flickered, and Sarah finally looked at me. "You're here," she said coldly. I froze, realizing her parents were there too, holding hands. Their faces were expressionless, their eyes empty. "What are you doing?" I cried, trying to grasp if this was a nightmare or reality. She stepped closer and whispered, "Lila, we need you to tell the truth. Do you remember where you were that night with Jake?" There was something cold and unnerving in her words. Flashes of that night by the lake suddenly rushed through my mind. Jake's first kiss, his charming smile. "Is this some kind of joke?" I yelled. But then it hit me. Jake. He told the police I'd left on my own that night, but that was a lie. "What are you doing to me?" Sarah leaned in closer. Lila, we just need to know the truth. What happened that night? I broke out into a cold sweat. Her voice, something about the subtle tremor in it, made me hold my breath. Her words didn't just come from her lips. They seemed to echo through the room, as if someone else were speaking with her. I glanced at her parents again. Their faces were like marble statues. Why are you asking this? I whispered. Because I know you're hiding something, Lila, she answered, her smile slow and deliberate. Her fingers, adorned with rings engraved with symbols I'd never seen, began flipping through the pages of her book. Jake did something, didn't he? She pressed. You always defended him, but you couldn't stop what happened. Her words pierced me like knives. Memories of that night swirled in my mind, blurry and disjointed, like looking through fog. The lake, Jake, his grin that seemed so genuine, and what he did after. No, I whispered, trying to push the thoughts away. Lila, don't be afraid, Sarah said, stepping closer. This is part of the process. If you tell us, we can free you. We can stop him before he hurts someone else. What are you talking about? I shouted, stepping back. My back hit the table, making the candles wobble. One fell, its flame catching the tablecloth. Sarah didn't even flinch. She raised her hand, and the fire extinguished on its own. The room filled with the acrid smell of burnt wax and something sweet, almost sickly. You can't keep hiding this, she said firmly, her voice steely. Jake is dangerous, and you know it. The room seemed to close in on me, the walls narrowing. The ground beneath me swayed as if I were standing on a rocking boat. A thought flashed through my head. This is her magic. She's doing something to me. I'm not hiding anything, I screamed, trying to regain control. Then why don't you remember? Her voice hit me like a clap of thunder. The air turned icy. Something cold brushed against my neck, and I whipped around, but no one was there. Meanwhile, Sarah traced a glowing green symbol in the air, its light casting eerie shadows on the walls. Where were you that night, Lila? She asked again, her voice now a chorus of whispers. We were at the lake, I murmured. What happened next? Tears filled my eyes, and I tried to look away, but something held me in place. I remembered arguing with Jake, how he'd pushed me, how I'd fallen into the water. After that, everything blurred, but I remembered crawling onto the shore. Jake was gone. He left me there, I whispered. Sarah leaned in, her glowing green eyes piercing mine. And after that, you never came home, Lila, she said. What do you mean? I gasped. I'm here. I'm alive. You think you're alive, she said quietly, her voice carrying an unbearable weight. Jake told the police you went home, but he lied. He went back to the lake. He did something horrible. The light in the room dimmed. The candles flared, but their flames were now black. The symbols on the floor glowed, and thick mist began to rise from them. I'll find the truth, Sarah said, and you're going to help me. I tried to run, but the room seemed to seal itself shut. The mist wrapped around my legs, and I felt my strength leaving me. Jake will pay for what he did, Sarah whispered. But for that, I need your help, Lila. You have to show me what happened that night. Her voice sounded like a command, and memories began pouring out, swallowing me like the icy lake on that fateful night. The mist around my feet rose, wrapping itself around me like cold, unrelenting hands. Memories tore through my mind, and I could no longer hold them back. Before my eyes, Jake appeared again. His dark smile, the cold glint in his eyes, his hands shoving me into the water. I remembered thrashing, struggling to break free, the air leaving my lungs, the cold and darkness consuming me. And then, nothing. You died that night, Lila, my friend said. Her voice was calm, but there was something indescribably tragic in her tone. No, I screamed, feeling the weight of realization tearing me apart. But it's true. You're no longer among the living. What you are now, it's just an echo. And Jake, he's the one to blame. The world around me began to collapse. The walls of the kitchen disappeared, replaced by trees, and in the distance I heard the lapping of water. The lake, the same lake. I stood at its edge, staring at my reflection in the water. What I saw made me cry out. My face was pale, my eyes empty, and my skin cracked like it was made of clay. What's happening to me? I turned to my friend, who stood beside me. "This is the truth," she said, looking at me. Her face was tired, as if she had carried an unbearable burden. "You're trapped between worlds. Your body left this world that night, but your soul stayed behind. And Jake has to answer for what he did." I felt rage rising within me. Jake, the one I trusted, the one I loved, had betrayed me, left me to die. "What do you want to do?" I asked my friend, feeling a chilling but unstoppable desire to act growing inside me. "Help you find peace," she replied. "But for that, Jake must confess. He can't be allowed to go unpunished." She raised her hands and glowing symbols appeared in the air again. The lake around us began to boil, the water rising in waves, and I heard voices. They whispered, called out, demanded. "What are you doing?" I whispered, barely able to stay on my feet. "I'm going to help you see him one last time," she said. Suddenly I was standing in front of Jake. He was in his house, sitting in the dark, clutching his phone. His face was tense, his eyes full of fear. He was whispering something, praying. "Jake," I shouted, and for a moment he looked up. He heard me, his eyes filled with terror. "It's you," he whispered, his voice trembling. "You left me," I cried out. "You killed me." He dropped the phone and tried to run, but shadows emerged from nowhere, preventing his escape. They wrapped around him just as they had around me earlier. "Confess," my friend's voice echoed from somewhere distant, but it was undeniable, like a lightning strike. "I didn't mean to," Jake screamed. "It was an accident. She fell. I was scared. I didn't know what to do." His words cut through me. The truth was horrifying, but it brought relief. The world around me began to dissolve. The shadows retreated, and I felt the cold leaving my body. I turned to my friend. She gave me a sad smile. "Now you can find peace, Lila," she said. The last thing I saw was the lake. It was calm, peaceful. And then everything disappeared. I felt warmth envelop me, and at last, I was able to let go.